What's up, everybody? It's your boy Ghost called Keefy, and welcome to War Stories Episode 5. Um, Appreciate all the feedback so far on the series, and really enjoy sharing these stories with you all. It's been a lot of fun for me to go down memory lane and share some of these stories from my career as a journalist, from my life as a fan, and also as my former path as a musician. Today is going to be about that path. I'm going to talk a little bit about my former band Grunt and the song Eternal Damnation, which is very near and dear to me. It's one of the few songs almost totally written by me. Maybe 85% of that song was written by me. It is about me, or about who I was back when I was probably 25, 26 years old, a very confused, angry young person. I'm now an older, confused, angry, older person. And, you know, it was a microcosm of that time. I investigated the song and really went back in a time capsule and try to put myself back in that frame of mind. When you used to hear that opening riff, when we would play it live, or when you listened to the album, even though it was later on the album, we would, you knew it was about to be a circle pit. You knew it was about to be a headbanging, fist pumping fest. And, you know, I, it was a time. It was definitely a time in my life, my mid 20s, when I played a lot of shows in bands and, worked very hard at trying to make it, air quotes, make it. It was kind of the time of new metal and late 90s. Um, the band Grunt was really thrash metal, hard rock, and a few other things. We flirted with a lot of different subgenres by trying to be ourselves at the same time. I was the co-lead vocalist of the band. I sing with occasional yells, but mostly sing. And the other singer in the band was kind of a screamer, a hardcore guy, not really a singer traditionally. But it worked. It worked. The two voices, we used to back each other up. We would sometimes call and answer each other. Sometimes we would finish each other's parts. There were definitely a lot of songs where that guy would sing one bunch of songs and I would sing the rest. Um, and we played out really hard for a couple of years, and people got to know us locally, and we cut a couple of demos and famously gave our demo tape to Lars Ulrich of Metallica. I will probably tell that Metallica story, how I met Metallica at one point on these war stories. This isn't it, but met Metallica, gave him our demo. Didn't really go anywhere. And then, put out our CD, which was 20 years ago this year. March 3rd was the official anniversary of the album, but I felt I wasn't really quite ready to celebrate it or to brag about it or talk about it. But I thought this would be a good opportunity to kind of share some of my feelings about that era. And, I'll dial it back for a second and talk a little bit about some personal history, and then I'll talk a little bit about the band. As I've discussed in some of these episodes, I have come from a musical background. I come from a family of performers, and especially my mom, who was a great dancer and choreographer and pushed me to pursue my dreams of being in music. And from a young age, I sang and I acted and I took music theory and guitar lessons, and I was never very good at guitar. I was told I had potential. I didn't really see it through. And took lessons through school, and even used to leave elementary school early to go from one part of the Bronx to the other, from almost Gun Hill Road, where my elementary school was, all the way over to Pelham Parkway North, if you know the Bronx very well, and with my acoustic guitar on my back and take lessons and music theory. And, it was a fun time. It was a fun time in my life. I always wanted to be around music. I always envisioned that I would be on stages, and eventually I was. As a young preteen and a teenager, I did a lot of acting in community theater, and for a long time I thought that my acting was ahead of my singing. In fairness, I'm a good vocalist, and I am a tireless worker, much like with Ghost Cult. I'm fairly talented as a writer, but I'm a tireless editor and worker. This is, 80% perspiration and 20% inspiration. But as always, but I thought I was a better actor than a singer. That kind of flipped around in time. Um, and I had kind of a very tough childhood, so music and the arts were a huge outlet for me. I'm not ashamed to be a theater kid. I don't know why that's like weird or dumb to some people, but like I'm very proud of my time in musical theater. It totally shaped me in heavy metal and rock. And I love Broadway musicals and I love theater. My mom, who was a dancer, wanted me to also dance, and I was like, "Listen, I'm already getting my ass beat up like every day at school and in the block. Like, you don't really want me with dancing shoes and a leotard." I'm not being stereotypical, but I literally was already being picked on all the time, and I was like, I really don't need to give them one more thing to lay into me about. Um, she felt it was a waste because I was her son and I would have been good, and I was like, no, I really don't enjoy dancing. I was always kind of chubby, or I was very thin, and then I got very chubby. Started to get chubby at like 8, 9. But I had a big personality, and I had a lot of drive and some talent. Depends on who you talk to. Some people thought I was gifted. There were some reviews written about my acting that were very favorable when I was 12, 13, 14. And like I said, the arts were really my respite from a tough life, a broken home, bullied constantly. Um, I had a very hard time at my junior high school, Frank D. Whalen Junior High School 135 in the Bronx. I think it's still there. And it was very tough. I was poor. At that time, we were very poor. And I had like the same 3 sets of clothes and nothing else. And, wear my sneakers till they were like falling apart till I could get new ones. It was just a tough time in our lives. And I would get picked on mercilessly. I knew a lot about music, so people liked me. They liked to pick my brain about monster movies or Van Halen or Zeppelin or Metallica. I was starting to get into metal at that point. I met my best friend Curtis, who turned me on to all kinds of thrash metal and rock, and we explored a lot of music together, and we played music in our formative years together, him on guitar, me on bass and singing. He also sang too. And a lot of formative basement jams that helped shape who I am. I learned a lot from him. He was innately gifted at music. I wasn't. I had to work. I felt like I was a little gifted, and the rest of it was work. I had to work at it. And interestingly, I was still doing a lot of theater. So I would like go to junior high school and have a shitty day, and then come home, put on actual nicer clothes. I got like a few nicer things to wear, change my clothes into something nicer to wear, and then go to acting class or go to musical theater group and work on plays and performances and singing. And it was a real, it was like a weird double life, I guess. I don't know if other kids experience this. If anybody has, drop me a comment below and let me know if this is something similar, or is it just me? I felt like a James Bond, like I had 2 identities. And then of course it was time, we went in New York City, we had junior high school to either the 8th or 9th grade, and then you went to high school. And in the 8th grade, I auditioned for LaGuardia High School of Music and Art and Performing Arts, as I talked about in the last episode, the Whitney Houston episode, the famous Whitney Houston story. I auditioned in the 8th grade, and I got in for both acting and singing. But my mom was worried about letting me go on the train. I was kind of a soft kid, getting beat up all the time, and take the train to the city every day seemed very scary in the late 80s. Bernard Getz type of year, stuff going on, a lot of crime. My dad was mugged a bunch of times on the train, sometimes robbed of his paycheck once. Like, he started to carry a gun and a screwdriver in his lunch bag, like in case someone fucked with him. He never really carried cash. We never had much, but like, there were no credit cards back then for us. But like, yeah, it was rough, man. It was kind of scary. And I was like, okay, I guess I'm not going to go. I'll do one more year in this fucking hellhole, I guess. And I went back for my senior year of junior high school, so 9th grade, and I started to come out of my shell a little bit. I started to be a little more assertive, stick up for myself. I had been taking Taekwondo on the down low for a few years, and I started to actually feel like stronger as a person and lost some weight. And people started to notice like I was a little more cocky and shit talking back because I was tired of getting beat up and bullied every day. So come to the end of the year, they go to make the announcements. I don't imagine they do this now where they make announcements in front of a whole room of people like so-and-so got into this and so-and-so got into that, whether it's your homeroom or a class or whatever. Seems like a very participation trophy type of thing that might be hurtful to some kids who are like, well, I guess I'm just going to my local school and I'm a bum or I'm nobody, which isn't true. Everybody is special at something. And so they made the announcements that I got in. And a bunch of my classmates were like, you? And some of them went to school with me from junior high school to LaGuardia High School. And they were like, you got in? I feel less special now that you got in. And I was like, oh, really? Well, I've been doing this since I'm 4 years old. Who the fuck are you? I've been training for this moment all my life to go be a star, and you're gonna shit on me now. This is kind of what my life was like as a young kid. No wonder so many teenagers are like rancid and angry and brutal, and just beside being an emotional mess and beside whatever was going on in my home, this is the treatment I got. So anyway, I digress. I get into LaGuardia, end up in LaGuardia, and I make it through school. I sing with Whitney Houston. I overcome some anxiety issues, and I get into my adult life. And I had played music as a teenager. I started to try out for bands. I wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I got into community college, at Bronx Community College. I met some other musicians. We tried to start some bands. One particular guy used to like convince me that I wasn't very good and I shouldn't try to sing metal. I wanted to do like a stoner doom COC type of band, Clutch, stuff like that. And he was like, nah, you're not going to be any good at that. That's not good for you. And then turned around and did that exact same thing, except shitty. That person is still around today in New York City, which is really sad that they're still doing it. The thing they tried to talk me out of doing it. But ended up founding what would become Grunt in 1993, and again meant to be like thrash metal, hard rock, kind of mix between Metallica, Pantera, Queensryche, Alice in Chains. A few other influences would come in. We did do some down tuning later in the 90s. We did flirt with a little bit of new metal at once, like for parts of songs, not whole songs, because we wouldn't be able to pull that off, honestly. We didn't have the skill to pull it off, really. But there were bands in the Bronx who were like an amalgam of different bands. There was like a Megadeth band, there was a Metallica band, there was a Korn band, there was a Limp Bizkit band. So, there was all kinds of a plethora of genres and styles and types of different bands. There was hardcore bands. There was sort of a death metal scene that was calling themselves Bronx deathcore before deathcore became a popular term globally. They were doing like death metal with a hardcore sensibility, like what is now deathcore and sort of a metalcore crossover, but like really brutal. Bands like Irate and hardcore bands like District 9. A lot of great stuff in the scene here. A lot of great bands. Many of my peer bands I cherish and treasure. We were rivals, but like there was respect. And, obviously when it was time to play on stage, we meant business. I would say the claim to fame of Grunt is that our performances and our collective energy was probably bigger than our talent, but we were, we had moments when we were very dramatic and we were very energetic live. And, we wrote these big epic songs sometimes that were like, our version of Fade to Black, or our version of, In My Darkest Hour, or our version of Paranoid, or our version of, Master of Puppets, if you will. Not as good, clearly, but like that's what we envisioned ourselves as becoming, stepping into those footsteps that we wanted to follow. And we that's kind of where we were at. We wanted to sort of grow and thrive in the scene, and we put out a few demos with some songs. Some of them had been left over for many years that we continued to play. And when you write songs, the very first stuff you ever make feels very important to you when people start to accept it, not just your close friends, but strangers compliment you, and you start to think like, oh, this is really good, or, I must really be good at this. And, over time, we developed better as songwriters. We got our drummer, Steve Kelly. Shout out to Steve. I'm still friends with Steve. Not really in touch with the other guys in the band. But we coalesced. It was hard to find a drummer. We were a 2 or 3 piece for many years. 2 guitars, 2 guys singing, 2 guitars and bass, me. And eventually we took some of those older songs and we crafted a bunch of newer songs once we got in Steve. That became the basis for this record called Twice Through Hell, with a 2, Twice Through Hell, very late 90s, like Boys to Men. Not quite Roman numerals, but Arabic number 2. And named for our song Twice Through Hell. It seemed very epic and fitting. We had a reputation as kind of a ballady type of band because we would have these like fade to black, long starting, simmering to a slow boil type of metal song like Queensryche or Metallica, and then it would like lift up at the end and become like thrash or heavy metal. And we were trying to break away from that by the time the album came along. Some of the earlier songs we had for a long time, we didn't even really like playing them anymore, but we put them on the record because we're like, well, what are we going to do, not record them? When every other band around us was doing an EP, we were the kind of band, we're going to do a whole album. I don't know, in hindsight, if that was the best idea or I'm kind of misguided, but that was what was in our hearts. It was definitely in my heart to do a full album and be able to say that I made an album. And I made a few, actually, albums and EPs, many, actually. And so, we recorded it for a while. We recorded with a guy who had produced Dope's demo that got them a record deal. So I was like very impressed with this guy. He charged not the most, and he had a really big space that seemed cool. We checked it out first, and we like saw ourselves recording. It felt like a real big professional recording studio in a big loft on the Midtown West Side, like 45th Street and like 11th Avenue. So we had like a cheap space that was huge. And we go into work with him for like a long weekend of recording to basically cut scratch tracks and set up our gear, mic everything. We did like a whole day of just setup and like maybe half a day of recording, and then we did another full day of just takes and overdubs and other things. And this guy was kind of like gross. He had like terrible hygiene. Technically in the album liner notes he's listed as some smelly bastard, because what he did was he took our money and then he rabbited. We were supposed to do another weekend of sessions with him, and he got evicted and just disappeared off the face of the earth. There was no Facebook back then. It was like 1998, 1999. And we're like, what the fuck is going to happen with our records? We had like 2-inch tapes and no fucking where to put them. Like, we don't know what to do. And ironically, right at the end of 1999, we found some place to go, and so we needed to track most of the lead vocals of the album and some overdubs of guitar stuff. And I was like, we're not going to recapture that sound anywhere. Like, what are we going to do to recapture the sound? So this guy recorded the basic tracks and everything. We didn't want to redo the whole album again. We're kind of 4 broke guys, 3 adults and a young adult guy. And, it was a challenge. Like, how do we finish this record? But we managed to find a place in Long Island City and go in there and bang out a bunch of lead vocals and bang out a bunch of sessions and some gang vocals and a couple of funny things and some hidden things and a bunch of extra guitar solo stuff because we were known as a good big guitar band. Our lead player, Sammy, was particularly exceptional at guitar. He's a wizard at fucking guitar playing, metal guitar. And people would come to just see us to see him play, actually, sometimes, but, that was part of the draw. But, we finished the record. Doesn't sound the greatest. Doesn't sound that great listening back to it lately now. Production should have been and could have been better for all the money that was spent. I had actually lost my job in December of 99. I got laid off from a job that I had for a few years working in the television and film industry in New York City, at the Yellow Pages for the television and film industry. And I got let go the night of December 3rd, 1999. I remember it because I went to go see Rage Against the Machine at Nassau Coliseum with, I think, At the Drive-In and Gangstar opening. Crazy. It was a crazy good show. And so I get like some unemployment, I think, and a severance check or something, and I use that to kind of finish the record. I willed the record into existence on the back of that money from getting laid off, and pressed records and printed up CDs, and we did everything DIY. This is before it was still like email, but it really wasn't an internet. We didn't have a website, but we did a mailing list, and we crowdsourced from our friends, like photography of the band. In hindsight, should have been better photography. We had done some semi-professional photos a few years ago. We had appeared in Metal Maniacs at one point off of the strength of a demo, and sent them a demo to review, which they liked, which had some of those songs that ended up on the album. And we put the album out. We did a record release show. We played. I mean, we played constantly. We used to play so much actually that we didn't rehearse that much. We didn't hold rehearsals. We would just go do shows, and that's how much we were playing. Or we would just jam in my apartment or somebody else's apartment, and sometimes there would be a gap like a few weeks, and then we would go do a studio. But at one point, once we had the record out, we never went really to rehearse much. Um, we mostly went and played shows, and we were like the local band at the Blackthorn in the Bronx, which was the predecessor to Blackthorn 51. We played Castle Heights, which was the predecessor to Blackthorn 51. CVGBs, Don Hills, SOBs, Wetlands, Don Hills, I mentioned already. The Pussycat Club, Voodoo Lounge, we played Red Zone, all the Lemoore. We played all these places. So all the places I used to go to as a fan. Playing CBGB's was amazing. Played there a bunch of times. Did audition night a few times, and then we got paid to come in and play there, including a few Saturday nights when we were on a local bill. It's pretty fucking incredible. And we played our record release show, and then we did a week later. We did the March Metal Meltdown, which was run by Jack Koshik of the famous Milwaukee Metal Fest and other things, and it was a bit of a shit show, but we played that show as one of the opening bands of the weekend on the same bill with like Testament, S.O.D, Doro, Shadows Fall, some bands, Whiplash played that weekend, like incredible stuff. And this is 20 years ago. And Immolation had become friends with us because we had been at a lot of shows with them, and they got to know us a little bit from Yonkers, where we used to hang out a lot at like a diner, and they were there too. And they actually got up early on a Saturday to come see us as one of the first bands of the day. They came to hang out and see us play, and they were like, I came off the stage, and they were like, gave me a hug, and I was like, these guys are genius death metal guys, and they're like, love our band of heavy metal and rock, like Metallica, Pantera stuff, and they liked it. And but there were always problems. It was a volatile mix of dudes, and honestly, in hindsight, I've been thinking a lot about this lately. Some of it was me, my own ego. I'm very driven. I'm a little bit of a taskmaster and a perfectionist, and so not that I'm a diva at all, but I do have a bit of an ego, and I think looking back on it now, I think certain people in the band felt like when we fought, we did better and played better, but I also feel like that was detrimental, and I was partially detrimental to the success of the band. We had some good songs. We didn't really have a good recording. Our marketing game was on point. Our performances were the stuff of legend. I'm just not just saying that. We used to like literally burn down shows with our energy, close out a show, play a second set, play covers, play an extra hour. We did a lot of things. People followed in our footsteps. We jumped around, and we're just like looking at our hands playing. We connected with audiences. Sometimes we would jump into the crowd and play like guitar in a crowd with like wireless guitars and stuff. We used to we loved Sepultura and Metallica and other bands, and we used to like intersperse little riffs and famous part. Like we do like an intro of like Welcome to the Jungle at our record release show, and then break into one of our songs, or do like Refuse Resist by Sepultura, and then like break into one of our songs in the same key. So it was cool. We were a fun band, I think, but I regret like my behavior, and looking back on some of this music, I regret like some of the choices I made, and I wish I had done things a little differently. I don't have a lot of regrets, but that's some of them have to do with this band. But I think there was a ceiling on how far we were going to ever go anyway, because of personalities in the band that were not really built to succeed or built for the long haul of the music business. But that being said and done, I am very proud of the band, and I'm very proud of the album, and people still talk to me about it and ask me about it. I am hoping to put out Eternal Damnation, the title of this episode, the title of that song, the song that I wrote most of, as a single on Bandcamp. And I have been kind of reignited a little bit my playing during the quarantine here, so I picked up the acoustic, not well, clearly. Very rusty, and I don't remember some of my own stuff, but I might consider doing some new songs or some new versions of old songs that are mine that I think I might like to do. And I think It was listening back to this record has been a real time capsule for that period of time in my life. There was a lot of shenanigans that band got into. We were like sometimes reviled, sometimes loved. We were definitely almost killed a bunch of times by gangs of dudes and hardcore dudes. One thing we used to do that was pretty funny is, you would play on a bill with certain groups of bands, like hardcore bands. We're not a hardcore band, just like we just didn't have what they were looking for, but they would book us because we could draw. We would always bring our friends out with us and draw people. We didn't do a lot of guest lists, really. Everybody paid to get in. So we would play with fans who would just be like, not into it. And then we would kind of antagonize them. Like, the next person that doesn't march to this song's a fucking pussy. And they would get mad and be like, oh yeah, and then we would play like a heavy song and they would punch each other, and like, that was good. That was a good one. I was like, I know, because I fucking goaded you into it, like paying attention to us. But like, that's not, you want to making it. I always felt like apathy is the worst thing. Like, hate me or love me, that's what I want. Like, reaction. Like, no reaction is like, that's the worst. That's just the fucking worst. So, I'm proud of that band. We did a lot of fun things. We did a lot of cool things in our scene that other bands did not do. We had a whole album before most other bands did. I would like to have seen what we would have done in the future with an EP, new music we were writing at the tail end of my tenure in that band. I think was very interesting and different. It was still thrash and much more less radio friendly. It was still like audible, hooky guitar stuff and cool melodies, but it was a little more mean and more indicative of who I was as a person in my late 20s. I ended up leaving that band. They continued on without me for a short spell, but didn't really last, to be honest. And I just didn't think they were going to last at all, actually, without me, because I really was the leader of the band for the longest time. That's not a boast. That's, anyone who remembers that band knows this. So I wasn't surprised that they called it a day a while later. And then I ended up in another band with one of those guitar players, Sammy. Hated BX, before any other band was called Hated that we knew of. And that was more like Biohazard, Suicidal Tendencies, rap, metal, hardcore. And it was a lot of fun. I wasn't in charge. I wasn't really the leader. I was just a side guy. I was just happy to play bass and scream back up gibberish and jump in the crowd and mosh around with my bass, headstock, jab people with my bass, and throw it down. And that was a lot of fun for me, and it kind of reignited my love for music again. Because by the end of Grunt, I was very down on being in band ever again. I was very sad. I was like, this is my dream and it's not working out. I aligned myself with some of the wrong people. And, that's kind of the story of Grunt. There's a DVD, VHS that I would like to someday put on DVD and might be fun to watch. Looking back on it, the album Twice Through Hell, some of it is very fucking cringy and disappointing. Some of it is very heartfelt and cool. There's a lot of cringy shit out there in the world today. None for me. I'm proud to say I wrote from my personal wellspring of experience. I had been a poet and a writer, and I thought that made my lyrics better. Some of them are just like, that's not very good. But like, some of them, had some meaning, and they still hold some meaning for me and for the people who used to come see us. And, some of it is not great. Some of the songs are not that great. Some of them are really powerful, and I'm surprised at how they held up. So I hope to share at least one song with everybody in the near future, and maybe a reimagined version of a song in the near future. But I don't think that's a project that can ever really come back. Some of the guys in the scene and I have flirted with the idea of putting on a show someday and doing like all-star Roadrunner United style, like put together little teams of everybody from the different bands and do like the hits, and maybe all our friends would come out and enjoy that. But like, I'm really all about moving forward with my personal life. I don't really play in bands anymore. I hope Salted Wounds, which you sometimes hear the theme song to in all these interviews and podcasts, that band I would like to see come back someday with my dudes Omar, Fahad, and Mike. But I don't know about that either. I'm not in charge of that band. I'm really probably a little more content being a backup guy in a band anyway. I learned that about myself, because there's a lot of pressure when you have to lead, and you don't always show your best self sometimes, because leadership puts you in an unenviable position. And it's not really about power and ego. It's about art. I do love making music. I do love playing on stage. I love performing. I love jamming in a room for just hours. But there's a whole other side to being in a band that is, painful and fractious and tough. And not everybody is made for this. Not everybody can do it, which is why they don't. So now you get these videos from me, and you get interviews with me in bands, and I channel my musical passion and all my years of training into reviews and interviews and my perspective about talking to bands and what that means. So thanks for being here for this edition of War Stories. If you like these kind of things, please like and subscribe. There's a whole playlist of these. If you missed any, you can watch them. Check out our interviews with bands, and of course, check out ghostcultmag.com and on all the socials, Ghost Cult Mag. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you sharing this time with me. Peace.